incominciamo sotto forma di laboratorio dolce, tanto l'essenziale è poi man mano consolidare sotto forma di congresso, nel pomeriggio e poi domani e dopodomani alla Villa. E questi interventi di questo congresso, insieme con gli altri che ci sono stati già in 3 appuntamenti precedenti, in cui abbiamo avuto alcuni degli autori di questo stesso congresso, formeranno poi un volume che sarà sicuramente un contributo scientifico o intellettuale per la questione, no? La questione essenziale di oggi, che non è che è la salute più che la malattia. E allora, quindi in questo senso la battaglia per la salute, quali sono i dispositivi intellettuali da instaurare per la salute stessa. E la salute è qualcosa che è stata iscritta invece nell'idea di salvezza e quindi è stata intesa sempre come salute mentale e quindi mai come salute intellettuale, quindi come istanza di qualità della vita. Allora è un po' questo è un po' il tema, questa è la questione intellettuale, e avremo modo man mano di quindi discutere, consolidare questo congresso. E è uscito anche, noi abbiamo pubblicato già un saggio dei nostri 2 relatori, come del resto abbiamo lavorato sui loro interventi nei congressi precedenti, negli ultimi 2 anni. Questo saggio e poi è nella rivista Il Secondo Rinascimento, si chiama L'immunità, e quindi tratta sia dell'AIDS sia del cosiddetto virus HIV. E adesso pubblichiamo quindi in PRIMA mondiale questo libro che nessuno ha voluto pubblicare, neppure in America, e noi scommettiamo invece che sarà pubblicato nei vari paesi europei, e quindi poi lo imporremo attraverso gli amici di New York anche in America. Questo libro di David Rasnick, La vera storia dell'AIDS, è un romanzo verità, quindi ha scritto vari saggi perché è uno scienziato, e in America c'è il motto pubblicare o morire, e quindi evidentemente ci sono delle confraternite molto ferme nell'impedire le pubblicazioni, soprattutto quelle che possano ostacolare i grandi apparati medico-legali e farmaceutici. E questi apparati certamente arrivano e si impongono anche in Europa, anche in Italia, in alcune parti di più, dove il calvinismo sicuramente favorisce. I protocolli di Milano, per esempio, per il cancro non sono quelli di Roma, che sono più collegati ad altri paesi europei. Alla Francia c'è un dispositivo di battaglia molto più avanzati a Roma che a Milano. Evidentemente questi dispositivi procedono da un'apertura differente, ma insomma noi abbiamo fatto una scommessa su Milano anche come città europea, come città internazionale, e quindi anche è qui che non soltanto una breccia dobbiamo continuare a tenere aperta e spalancata, ma quindi anche costruire e scrivere. Ma qual è la cosa che noi qui adesso incominciamo ad accennare? E avevamo incominciato già nelle occasioni precedenti, no? C'è qui l'onorevole Pasquale Bandiera, nelle occasioni precedenti, cioè La nascita di un istituto. Abbiamo parlato in sede di Unione Europea a Bruxelles, abbiamo trovato che ci sono posizioni favorevoli, lo stesso ieri sera anche lo stesso onorevole Pasquale Bandiera diceva che ci sono anche da parte sua, no, da parte di alcuni interlocutori, posizioni favorevoli, e così anche sicuramente da parte della regione Lombardia e da parte della provincia di Milano, insomma c'è un interesse per questo istituto, e quindi per non lasciare le cose bloccate come sono state finora sotto quindi l'egida dei sistemi di potere. Allora, questo istituto sarà un istituto scientifico per la ricerca e per la cura e anche per la memoria, perché è essenziale, diciamo, che instaurare la memoria. Che instaurare la memoria implica scrivere l'avvenire. È per questo che la memoria viene sempre cancellata, spesso cancellata, dietro invece la ricostruzione di un presunto passato che è fittizio, che è falso, che è opera dei vari regimi politici. Allora, noi riteniamo che questa memoria sia essenziale. C'è a Londra una raccolta di un fondo, c'è un fondo proprio e hanno fatto appello a noi anche per questa stessa raccolta, ma insomma noi vogliamo farla a Milano poi collegarla, renderla disponibile internazionalmente rispetto a questi studi, sia rispetto alla AIDS, sia rispetto al cancro per esempio, ma anche rispetto ad altre cose come l'ictus, come l'infarto o altre cose che noi abbiamo man mano affrontato. Quindi questo ormai è diventato un obiettivo della nostra Fondazione Università, cioè perché noi non abbiamo fatto un'università per le lauree. Adesso le lauree diventano, con il 3+2, come è abbastanza chiaro, diventano una cosa introduttiva, propedeutica, ma insomma non c'è la laurea di 3 anni e nemmeno la cosiddetta specializzazione di +2 dà l'accesso all'essenziale. E allora l'accesso all'essenziale è soprattutto allo statuto intellettuale, oltre che professionale, può essere dato soltanto da master garantiti da fondazioni università. Quindi sono post universitari. Questo è un obiettivo, e allora in questo ambito, nell'ambito quindi sia dei master, quindi come università, sia dei master per post universitari, sia della ricerca scientifica, perché questa è bloccata dai protocolli, è bloccata dagli apparati, è bloccata dai sistemi, è bloccata dalle industrie farmaceutiche. E allora in questo senso quindi sia la ricerca scientifica sia dunque la formazione. Allora questo è un po' l'obiettivo che stiamo appena accennando di questo istituto. La settimana scorsa è stato a Padova Robert Gallo, e Robert Gallo, come alcuni di voi hanno sentito, ha detto cerchiamo il vaccino, quindi prima dagli anni 60 agli anni 80 c'era chi cercava il virus del cancro, ci sono stati anche dei premi Nobel dati per avere presuntamente trovato il virus, dicevamo ieri sera, ma insomma questo virus non c'è, e poi viene scoperto, tra virgolette, qualcosa, un retrovirus che è innocuo, che dunque non c'entra nulla con con l'AIDS. L'AIDS, diciamo, qualcosa che investe il dispositivo immunitario, può essere assolutamente esente da questo retrovirus. E l'AIDS non è per nulla contagiosa, quindi tra le ragioni che diciamo sono state dette nelle occasioni precedenti ci sono l'uso massiccio, l'uso di droghe, l'uso di psicofarmaci e poi la carenza alimentare. E quando in Africa si dice che ci sono milioni e milioni di morti dove tutto viene attribuito all'AIDS, in pratica anche la bronchite, anche il raffreddore, anche qualsiasi cosa, ma in effetti lì la ragione principale è quella che Duesberg chiama il tenore di vita, ma insomma la ragione principale lì è la fame. È la fame. È la fame che quindi ha come conseguenza evidentemente una, tra virgolette, insufficienza o diminuzione o assenza, noi diciamo, del dispositivo immunitario come dispositivo intellettuale. Allora, è di questo che occorre discutere, in fin dei conti, del cervello. Il cervello, come diceva Machiavelli, come diceva Leonardo da Vinci, il cervello, il dispositivo intellettuale e quindi il dispositivo immunitario e quindi anche il progetto di vita e il programma di vita. Allora, qual è la direzione? Quali sono le novità? Ecco, questa è una domanda che noi possiamo rivolgere a Montagnier, a Dulbecco, a Rita Levi Montalcini, oppure ai vari studiosi. Anche qui verranno diversi studiosi. Cioè, nei vari settori, qual è la direzione? Qual è la novità? Un istituto che registri la direzione e la novità per quanto attiene all'indagine anche medica mi pare essenziale. Non c'è perché tante volte viene sbandierata come scoperta e come novità qualcosa che deve soltanto aumentare le quotazioni in borsa o dell'industria farmaceutica o dell'ospedale in questione o dell'università in questione. Quindi ogni tanto c'è l'ospedale tale dei tali che annuncia un possibile vaccino, una possibile scoperta, ma fra quanto tempo? 5 anni, 10 anni? Oggi 5 anni, 10 anni, come dire l'infinito. E non basta però per il momento per aumentare le quotazioni in borsa dell'industria farmaceutica in questione, ripeto, dell'ospedale, che quindi diventa, per dir così, all'avanguardia. Ecco, allora questo è un po' il tema. Valutare effettivamente quali sono le novità, qual è la direzione per quanto attiene alla medicina, quindi diciamo all'idioma per ciascuno, alla logica per ciascuno, perché questa è la medicina, in fin dei conti, è anche mezzo si comporta logica particolare a ciascuno, particolare, non universale, perché allora siamo soltanto in un programma non di vita ma di morte. Allora è un po' questa. Che cosa fa la medicina? La contabilità delle nascite e delle morti e quindi il sistema di contabilità delle nascite e delle morti, oppure no, oppure è dissidenza, è idioma, è logica, è particolarità. Queste sono alcune questioni che non agevolmente vengono enunciate. Ecco, noi troviamo insomma che c'è comunque in Italia una certa apertura e quindi che questo istituto può nascere, almeno oggi qui, nonostante tanti contrasti, insomma può nascere a Milano. può nascere a Milano e quindi collegandosi sicuramente con l'Europa diventa e con Roma diventa un istituto internazionale che può avvalersi di scienziati dagli Stati Uniti all'Europa, alla Russia, al Giappone e quindi davvero costituire quindi una rete, una tela, un tessuto, no, per queste intraprese. Ecco, questo un po' diciamo così, il preambolo. Allora, noi abbiamo questa puntata di queste 3 giornate e poi ne avremo un'altra ai primi di luglio, no? Ai primi di luglio dove ci sono, vogliamo proprio che sia consacrata questa nascita dell'istituto, proprio in luglio prossimo, e che sia quindi da allora che parta proprio, sia un congresso con cui parta questo istituto. Un istituto che noi diciamo sarà sicuramente collegato con Duesberg e con alcuni premi Nobel, con alcuni scienziati che noi stessi come fondazione riusciamo a collegare e a contattare. Ecco, questo diciamo come preambolo. Quindi da una parte salutiamo voi che siete venuti già questa mattina per questo inizio di laboratorio e salutiamo quindi i relatori che sono qui al tavolo, Duesberg e Rasnik, l'onorevole Pasquale Bandiera, Ove Petersen e Mattias Poterc, no, per indicare alcuni che sono già in sala. Sta arrivando da Città del Capo qualcuno di cui si è parlato nella stampa mondiale, Shlongo, che è arrivato alle stesse conclusioni di Duesberg per una sua strada del tutto indipendente. E questo quindi è interessante. Poi c'è una psicanalista che viene dalla Svezia, pure una giornalista, poi Roberto Busa, Giorgio Antonucci che da noi ha pubblicato 2 libri, più volte è venuto, Antonio Pezzano, il professor Pezzano primario quindi a Niguarda per la cardiologia, quindi ci sarà qui pomeriggio, lo stesso Marco Trabucchi che è direttore della rivista medica Tendenze Nuove e poi è appunto professore a Roma, no? Alla Torre Vergata, e direttore scientifico del gruppo di ricerca geriatrica di Brescia. Quindi la psicanalista svedese di Göteborg Eva Löfstedt viene anche dalla Klaus Kenlein, che era già venuto altre volte, ecco, e Paolo Pontigia, per fare alcuni nomi. Ma insomma a noi interessa impostare, l'abbiamo chiamato Congresso Master, questo, e proprio per questo motivo, perché è attorno per specificare alcune cose in modo particolare, e quindi diciamo che questo congresso master serve come quelli che lo hanno preceduto, da preparazione per questa nascita dell'istituto che noi sanciremo a partire da luglio. È essenziale che per noi che abbiamo diciamo inventato qualcosa fondato qualcosa di nuovo, che prima si chiamava genericamente psicanalisi, che noi chiamiamo cifrematica, che quindi riguarda la logica della parola e la scienza della parola, la struttura della parola, la scrittura della parola che non era mai stata intesa come originaria per 2500 anni. E quindi perché finora c'era soltanto la logica del discorso, la scienza del discorso, la struttura del discorso, e quindi insomma il discorso come causa, è l'unico discorso che quindi è causa, è il discorso della morte. Allora questo è un po' dunque questo è il preambolo. E quindi incominciamo. ripetiamo ancora, questo libro che vede praticamente le prime copie sono qui per questo laboratorio di David Eraslik, la vera storia dell'AIDS. Siamo contenti che appaia in prima mondiale in lingua italiana da noi, come è successo già per libri che erano in lingua russa, sono apparsi per la prima volta in Italia, per libri che erano in lingua francese sono apparsi per la prima volta in Italia, e questo mi pare importante. Questo è dovuto, dobbiamo dire, non all'Italia come provincia, ma insomma alla nostra iniziativa internazionale da sempre. E quindi siamo contenti che sia uscito questo libro. Uscirà, ripeto, un volume. Noi ci auguriamo che questo volume sia pronto per il Congresso di luglio, perché per quanto riguarda i materiali precedenti sono già pronti, no? E quindi dobbiamo aggiungere solo quelli di questo congresso. Verrà un volume molto significativo, con cui un volume che segnerà la nascita dell'istituto. La nascita dell'istituto, può darsi pure che faremo uno statuto a parte proprio per questo istituto. Bene, allora a questo punto incominciamo. Ciascuno di voi si munisca degli apparecchi in modo da poter seguire il congresso. Gli apparecchi sono abbastanza piccoli, ma insomma bisogna trovare, si possono prendere all'ingresso lasciando nome, cognome e carta d'identità, perché sono importanti, insomma servono ovviamente a coloro che ci hanno ospitato qui al congresso. Ecco, allora sì, allora quindi noi passiamo la parola adesso a questo punto a Peter Duesberg. Prego.
On the subject of AIDS, should I start with AIDS? Well, should I introduce?
Devo parlare adesso gli argomenti intorno a cui noi abbiamo parlato sono AIDS, cancro, abbiamo parlato in passato, la mucca pazza per l'Europa, in questo momento non c'è altro che la mucca pazza. Questi sono gli argomenti trattati, però insomma non c'è un argomento prefissato, per cui la battaglia per la salute, questa è la battaglia per la salute.
So could I have the overhead projector? Could we have that here?
No.
And this one here.
I'll get it for you.
The projector, for them. So
Ma non funziona questo. Funziona, no? Cosa bisogna girare? Sì, ho visto.
I give them
Prego.
to you like this, and then could we, let's see. Yeah, let me see. One second.
Probably sit over here.
Then I sit over there. Point. Is that pointed?
Or did you want to do that up here?
Ecco. Sì, adesso vediamo.
That's fine.
I'll mention it. I'll hold it up and then I don't have no overhead.
Allora parla
Yeah.
al microfono.
From here? With this? Oh,
No, with this.
With this?
Opzioni,
This
come
one.
vuole, sì.
As you want.
Either
Well,
way.
okay. Goody.
Okay. Now you give me the overheads and I'll put them.
I'll pull them out as I get them here. I have to prepare them here. See. So I'll start introducing the topic of AIDS, and as you possibly know already from Professore Verdiglione will also talk about cancer sometime. I could be drafted on that, but to make it a bit more coherent, let me focus first on AIDS, and then we'll talk later on cancer. Now, again, most of you know some history of AIDS. It started in the early 80s, clearly in America, not in Africa, where it's often now said to be originated from, with an increase, as they say, a dramatic increase of 26 or 30 previously known diseases. There's not one new disease among them, and here's are some of them. And that increased dramatically, not everywhere in the general population, but mostly in young male homosexuals and intravenous drug users. And this just gives you a number of those diseases. They included things like
Doesn't show up well, does it?
Bisognerà
maybe to be a little further away. Oh, no, yeah, it comes. It comes coming.
Peter,
Okay. Yeah. Right now. Yeah. Okay.
pure qui.
It's good on the
Cioè
wall.
dovete
It's better on the wall.
Yeah.
accorciare.
Much better on the wall.
Accorciare, non può essere sotto.
It's good on the wall.
Accorciare.
The screen doesn't move on
Ho
the
capito.
thing.
Allora che
The screen
apparecchio è?
doesn't move on the
Non
thing.
può andare sotto, deve
Looks
essere
solid.
dentro l'immagine, dentro lo schermo.
May not be able to use
Deve
it.
essere dentro lo schermo, altrimenti non serve.
Doesn't work.
Se non va dentro lo schermo non serve. Non serve a niente. No, ma non è la
No,
macchina.
it just doesn't reflect right.
Cioè bisogna rimpicciolire l'immagine.
It's made for 35
Rimpicciolire.
millimeters.
Ci sarà uno strumento per rimpicciolire l'immagine.
That's strange, huh?
Yeah, it just doesn't
Va
reflect.
bene.
See, it reflects light, but not dark. So,
Ma non è questione di
Just
luce, non
talk
è
about
questione
it.
di luce, è
That's
l'immagine,
bad, yeah.
è l'immagine che è grande, non
just talk about it, I guess. They can't move that. So,
So it's a penny. Yeah. No.
non è questione di luce, è questione di immagine.
Or if you could project it on a curtain, or is there some? Yeah. It on a white curtain.
Ma non è questo.
It seems strange that I wouldn't. It seems strange that it wouldn't. Nothing would work there. No.
here.
Oh, in projecting it on what?
Let's see if it works.
Oh, is that close? Okay. That's a strange thing. I mean, it almost absorbs it. And then, you know what they could. What I'm saying is, what would happen if we would project it against the curtain?
Yeah, but then
Could-
only you can see it.
No,
They
most
can't.
people could see the curtain. Well, you can see the window. Why don't you project it against that curtain here? Yeah. Then maybe that will work. Or the wall, this wall. This wall maybe, even better than, yeah, a curtain might be better. Yeah, that's already much better, see, that works. Much better. Well, at least some people can see it, it's better than nothing.
Così va bene così. Così va bene.
Things are falling apart. Don't need that one. Want it?
Non lo vede nessuno.
I cannot. Forget about it. Yeah, forget about it. Yeah. Everything is at the moment pretty bad. The thing fell apart that they stapled. Now I have it all disordered. I had my things open.
To the microphone.
And now where are the things that I have? That was okay. That's one of them. Yeah, that was. You still have that? One? Oh, it's there.
on there.
It's there.
Allora con l'apparecchio.
You might do better out here with the microphone.
This one.
Yeah.
It's here.
Sì, sì.
Turn it on.
It doesn't work. No.
Vediamo se funziona.
Let's take this one.
Pronto?
This one works. It's okay. Take this one then. That's pretty good.
Questo non funziona. Pronto? Questo non funziona. Funzionava prima.
We don't need much.
No, è già acceso, ma non funziona.
Give them the meaning of it.
Oh, you can see that? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you can see it, yeah.
They should have a curtain here, you know, like a bed sheet. A bed sheet would do. A bed sheet, you know, that would do. Yeah. On the wall. Yeah. Okay, so is everything okay now? Should I start? Yeah, good. So, in the 1980s, a bewildering collection of 26 previously known diseases, and as you can see from the selection that is on this slide here, many of them completely unrelated to each other, such as dementia and diarrhea and Kaposi sarcoma and pneumonia and night sweats and fevers and lymphomas, began to affect a growing number of young homosexuals and intravenous drug users primarily, and some hemophiliacs in the United States and in Europe. Because the epidemic was restricted early on and stayed that way until now to these risk groups, as I said, the homosexuals, intravenous drug users, and hemophiliacs, the Centers for Disease Control, which is in charge of watching the appearance of epidemics in the US, suspected there may be a common cause, something that was the denominator of all these different diseases. And they proposed immunodeficiency. They argued when the immune system fails for some reason that we have yet to determine, then you're subject to many of these diseases. And it's for that reason they put these different diseases under a similar term or the same term. They call them all acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. They said it's a syndrome that is a consequence of immunodeficiency. The fear that the cause of AIDS may be of this immunodeficiency, may be a new microbe or virus, was then alarmingly advertised by the Centers for Disease Control in virtually daily press releases, and it generated enormous interest in the public and fear in the public, and huge government programs for the National Cancer Institute, the National Institute of Health, and of course for the Centers for Disease Control. Overnight they had millions to spend and had thousands of scientists interested in getting grants to study the cause of AIDS. And within a year's time, eager scientists reported to have found causes of AIDS. And one of the most successful of these to this day was Robert Gallo from the NIH, who said he had found the cause of AIDS in 1984, which was then advertised or endorsed by the US government because it was a government program. And in order to explain why the disease seemed to be limited to adults in the least likely age group to get diseases like that, infectious diseases or any diseases for that matter, 20, 30, 40-year-old men, they said it is a sexually transmitted, homosexually transmitted virus that is acquired by sex and would cause these different diseases. So the Centers for Disease Control immediately accepted this hypothesis because it came from another division of the same government. The Department of Health and Human Services is the boss of the NIH, the Centers for Disease Control, and the NCI. They said, yes, this is now the basis for the definition, and AIDS from then on became defined officially for the US and therefore for the world as a collection of, well, 26, 30, depending on whose count you read, previously known diseases, the list of which you already know: pneumonia, Kaposi sarcoma, diarrhea, dementia, in the presence of antibody against HIV. So if these diseases occur, if you have diarrhea and antibody against HIV, you are an AIDS patient. If you have diarrhea and no antibody against HIV, you simply have diarrhea, as it used to be. If you have now tuberculosis and antibody against HIV, in the US and in Europe, you are an AIDS patient. You are treated with AZT and you are published in Science and in Nature. But if you have tuberculosis and no HIV, you are treated with antibiotics and you're not published anywhere, and no leading scientist will take great interest because tuberculosis has long been solved and is attributed to a bacterium, not to HIV. So that is the definition that you already alluded to, and David alluded to, that the Centers for Disease coined, and that is now the only definition of AIDS. The only one is known diseases plus antibody against HIV. In the absence of these antibodies, it's no AIDS. So, but now 20 years later, by any measure, this AIDS research and AIDS science in the US and elsewhere in the world has been a big disappointment. Despite 20 years of unprecedented efforts that cost the US taxpayer alone by now $93 billion. That is 93 times 10 to the 9 dollars that the US taxpayer alone paid. There's European taxpayers, there were companies, there was private money. All of this needs to be added to it. We have no tangible benefits to offer. Neither the CDC nor the NIH can say that they have a vaccine or they have a treatment or a drug. They have not been able to cure or save even one single life. With $93 billion, currently over 100,000 MDs and PhDs in the Western world working on this, day and night or round the clock, some of them, and not one single life has been saved. The largest private American foundation, called AMFA, American Foundation for AIDS Research in New York, that raises about $50 million a year from private funds from Liz Taylor and her friends and others, drug companies, has used the complete failure of the AIDS hypothesis and the whole AIDS approach, in fact, as a new way of getting more funds. So this is what they had in the buses in New York, in the Bay Area and San Francisco. In 1998, they said latest AIDS statistics, and then comes 7 zeros, which is a pun on the million HIV positives in America, have been cured. Nobody has ever been cured. 1 million are eligible to get AIDS because there are 1 million HIV positive Americans. So please support us and call us, collect 1-800-39-AMFA and send in $50 or $100 for Robert Gallo and Anthony Fauci, who have only had 93 billions to spare. They need more money. Of course, more money creates better results. At least that's the common idea in America and in the rest of the capitalist world. There are no communists and no ideologies, other ideologies left. It's only money, so lira or marks or euros, whatever it is. So, by contrast, think about it for a moment. Edward Jenner, perhaps some of you remember the name, the historians of science, I'm sure do, an English country doctor, ended the pox virus epidemics in Europe 200 years ago in 1798 single-handedly by inventing vaccination. He didn't mess around, he invented the concept of vaccination, for which he used extracts of pox that he got from a cow, and that's why it's to this day called vaccination, Wacker the cow. So, and 50 years ago, so that was Edward Jenner working by himself with cow extracts in a village in England, solving the pox epidemic within a year or two, compared to several 100,000 MDs and PhDs, including Nobel Prize winners, spending $93 billion in 20 years and curing Nezuno. Nobody so far. That's called scientific progress. About 50 years ago, a comparatively tiny group of scientists with a very small budget by today's standards, namely the polio scientists, who had millions to spend at the time, not billions. They were generated by the March of Dimes in those days, like Salk and Sabin and Koprovsky and a couple of others, solved the polio epidemic in the 50s within a few years by isolating the virus, showing that the virus would cause a disease in monkeys, establishing tissue culture systems in which they could assay how the virus would work and kill cells, and developing a vaccine which essentially has eliminated polio. Polio was on the decline even before the vaccine came out, but the vaccine could be shown to protect animals infected with the virus. In fact, the vaccine had unfortunately been shown to be able to cause the disease, because some of the early batches of Salk's vaccine were heat inactivated virus prepared by Cutter Lab, actually in Berkeley. They were not heat inactivated enough. 200 kids got polio and 15 of them died, promoted by the Centers for Disease Control. So they proved it in humans and in animals that polio was the cause of AIDS, and a working vaccine could actually protect against AIDS. Again, Stone Age by comparison, what we have now in high technology and monies available for science. These guys 50 years ago solved polio for a couple of millions, Edward Jenner for a couple of pounds, and now Gallo, Fauci, and the rest of the world on AIDS for 93 billion, nobody so far. So 18 years after the isolation of HIV by Montagnier and soon after Gallo, AIDS researchers cannot still induce one of the 26 AIDS-defining diseases in any system whatsoever. They inoculated over 150 chimpanzees at $50,000 per year they cost. All of them are positive now. They're living in zoos and in primate centers in the US and the rest of the world. Not one of them has ever developed AIDS. They have even been unable to demonstrate that HIV hurts any T cells, the hypothetical target of this virus, by causing immunodeficiency. The hypothesis of Gallo and the AIDS orthodoxy is HIV infects T cells die somewhere, and then you get immunodeficiency. But if you infect T cells in vitro, you will be surprised to observe that they prosper and grow indefinitely in culture. Some of them become cell lines. Some of these have been patented by the same people who have said that HIV is causing AIDS. Namely, the National Institute of Health and Robert Gallo have patented it in 1984. These cells are still growing in companies and in laboratories, and they are used to mass produce HIV for the AIDS test. You know, the AIDS test or the HIV test doesn't measure virus, doesn't measure disease. It measures antibodies against the virus. And to find antibodies, you have to have antigens. And that was the trick of Gallo and Montagnier to become, early on, the leaders in this business, the leaders in particular generating millions of dollars for themselves and for their institutions, for the Pasteur Institute, the NIH, by patenting the production of this. And these same cells that were infected in 1984 by Gallo and 1983 by Montagnier are still growing in companies indefinitely, immortally producing lots and lots of virus. And that virus can be isolated, inactivated, and used now to test for antibodies. And that made $100,000 supplement for Gallo at the NIH. Now he gets the full millions, and probably Luc Montagnier is not suffering himself. Robin Weiss, the leading AIDS researcher in the United Kingdom, has also patented it. So all of these guys are doing really well with the T cells not dying from HIV. The failure to find an experimental system in which to test HIV, either in animals or in cell culture, is the reason why they couldn't explain how a simple virus like this would be able to cause so many diseases. Even the epidemiology failed to support the virus AIDS hypothesis. Whereas the AIDS epidemic in the US and Europe first increased slowly for about 12 years until they peaked roughly in the middle of the 92, 93. The triangles is the, see, do we have a light? Or we don't need, but you can see the top one here. That's, yeah. Oh, you have also a light? Yeah. Okay, this here is the, well, here, these are all European or American countries. This is America, and these are the cases, AIDS cases as they went up and down, published by the World Health Organization over a period of 20 years. Now it's a little further down, it's here. So the argument is often, when you ask the AIDS establishment, how do we know HIV is causing AIDS? Well, they say the epidemiology is really proving it. Wherever there's AIDS, there's HIV. But in America, the HIV has been completely constant. That is to say, there was 1 million Americans where HIV, up or down, or this way? No, this way. Okay, so HIV was completely constant. There were 1 million antibody-positive Americans in 1985, and there are 1 million now. But when it started with 1 million, we had like a few thousand in 81. We went up to about 90,000 AIDS cases in 92 to 93, and per year, 70,000, and we are down to now, should I use both or one? Okay, so now we are down to approximately 30,000 cases, but the number of HIV positives are always the same. So the failure so in view of this, they have now, the AIDS establishment or the AIDS researchers now postulate cofactors, that HIV alone doesn't do it anymore, it needs some sort of a cofactor to cause AIDS. One of the classical quotes of Anthony Fauci, now director of AIDS research at the NIH, that was actually published in The Lancet is, now he said 2 years ago in an interview in The Lancet, most people agree now that it isn't just the virus, stupid, he said, because David Ho, the man of the year in science in America in 1990s of Time magazine in 1996 said it is the virus, stupid. And stupid was an article that was written in Science. The stupid was a reference to me and other AIDS dissidents who still wouldn't understand that HIV causes AIDS. So now the failure to find an experimental system in animals or in cell culture in which to test possible pathogenicity of HIV is the reason why they couldn't reconcile the epidemiology and the pathology with the virus, and why they have now introduced or postulated a grace period for the virus to reconcile the huge numbers of carriers and the few numbers with disease, and they call that a latent period of the virus of 10 years. So it's assumed now you get infected today at some wild party, you forgot your condoms or had some wild dates, you get infected with HIV, but that's not, it's bad 10 years from now, but for the next 10 years on average you have a grace period, you can think about it and see what you do. So 10 years later, you might end up with diarrhea or Kaposi sarcoma. That's what they call a latent period of HIV. But so then, according to this hypothesis, paradoxically, you could have sex at this last party with somebody who had Kaposi sarcoma, and you might end up getting diarrhea 10 years later. So you better write down what parties you go to and what you have sex with, and what diseases they had, and then you look at the list, 26 AIDS-defining diseases. 10 years later, you might get diarrhea, so you shouldn't be surprised. Why? Because you had sex with somebody who had Kaposi sarcoma 10 years ago. That's exactly the HIV/AIDS hypothesis of the Centers for Disease Control, the NIH, and the rest of the scientific world. If you question it, you lose your research funds immediately, and you'll be considered an iconoclast or a dissident, or worse things like that. So, and instead of debating the problems with this hypothesis, that it doesn't generate anything for the AIDS patients, costs the taxpayer $93 billion, and doesn't explain how HIV causes AIDS, the AIDS researchers prefer to make declarations, unilateral declarations, the most recent of which appeared in Nature in July at the occasion of the 13th International AIDS Conference at Durban, South Africa, was called the Durban Declaration. And popular as it was, Nature says it was signed and authored by over 5,000 people. We are no longer just scientists, we are people, we are all in this together. This is all this political jargon around AIDS, including Nobel Prize winners. So people and Nobel Prize winners have published in Nature that the evidence of HIV, that AIDS is caused by HIV, is clear-cut, exhaustive, and unambiguous. That's what it says in the declaration in Nature last summer. And it meets the highest standards of science. HIV is the sole cause of the epidemic. That's what it says in Nature. And then they let it follow with a warning to those who might think otherwise, even in science. There is widespread anxiety. Denying or doubting the cause of AIDS will cost countless lives. Implying, so if you question HIV, people might not use their condoms and might not take AZT, and you will have an epidemic spreading even faster. But far from meeting the highest standards of science in infectious diseases, that would be Koch's postulates, which say very briefly that a microbe that is suspected to cause disease has to be found in every case of the disease. It should be possible to isolate it from other microbes and from the host, and then take the purified microbe and cause the disease in a susceptible animal or accidentally or deliberately infected human. And the first of these postulates has yet to be met. There are thousands of AIDS cases that are free of HIV, although by definition they fixed that. As you recall, the definition of AIDS is now Kaposi sarcoma plus HIV. There are plenty of male homosexuals diagnosed with Kaposi sarcoma clinically in the absence of HIV. But they are no longer called AIDS now. They are simply Kaposi sarcoma patients. So it's only called AIDS when there is HIV. And then they say, look, we have a great correlation, 100% correlation. They do by definition. The Centers for Disease Control has defined AIDS as known diseases plus HIV as of 1985. But they have been unable to prove the third postulate, namely finding a system in which the virus causes the disease. Not even in cell culture can they demonstrate that HIV has any toxicity whatsoever. It cannot kill a cell or cannot harm any system that we can develop in there. Now, in worse than that, they haven't been able to even solve some of the original paradoxa of the HIV hypothesis and the virus AIDS hypothesis. And I want to list some of these briefly before I explain to you what could be done to solve that problem. So from the very beginning, the hypothesis that HIV was the cause of AIDS was burdened with a list of paradoxa in terms of the germ theory of disease, that a microbe, a virus, a bacterium would cause a disease. The first one of these that became obvious to me, or people who worked as virologists, was that in patients dying from AIDS, today and 20 years ago, the virus is practically never detectable. Even our leading AIDS researcher, formerly leading AIDS researcher Gallo, couldn't find it in most cases. He had hundreds of patients. He had to borrow a sample from Montagnier in Paris to say that was his discovery. But when you look even now with the most sensitive methods, you'll find that no more than 1 in 1,000 to 1 in 10,000 cells is ever infected, 0.01%. There's a review by a Dutch group in the latest Nature, in Nature Immunology, just a few months ago, Medema from Amsterdam, and they repeat again that the virus can only be found in 1 out of 1,000 to 10,000 T cells that are lost in AIDS patients. That creates a serious paradox. How do 99.9% of uninfected T cells disappear in AIDS patients by a virus that doesn't even infect them? Now let's have a look at the very few T cells that are ever found to be infected in AIDS patients. 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 10,000. Should they die? From everything that we know about HIV and T cells, they shouldn't die either. In fact, Gallo and the NIH have patented in the US, Boris Wellcome and Robin Weiss patented in the United Kingdom, and Montagnier and the Pasteur Institute patented in France for the rest of the world that HIV can be mass-produced in immortal T cells or B cells that grow indefinitely, have grown there since 1983 and 1984, 17 years now without one of them ever dying. So, and that is not a surprise for somebody who has studied retroviruses. That was my expertise for years prior to the AIDS epidemic. Retroviruses have one thing in common. They do never kill a cell, unlike almost all other viruses. And that is the reason why we and others have studied them as cancer viruses, or potential cancer viruses, or carcinogens, because they wouldn't kill a cell and therefore are theoretically a starting point for cancer. And here we say HIV is killing T cells. It's not found in almost any of them, and in the few that it's found, they're not dying. So that are the first two paradoxa of the virus hypothesis that stand unexplained now for 18 years. Not even the 5,000 people and the Nobel Prize winners have. That are detected by this HIV test in millions of people at $25 to $50 a test at least, never protect a patient or carrier against a disease caused by that virus. Ever since Edward Jenner invented vaccination 200 years ago, the principle of vaccination is that make antibodies to protect yourself against disease. Once you have antibodies, every doctor in the world, immunologists or researcher will tell you, now you have the best protection that science can offer, or nature can offer, antibodies against the microbe. So every doctor will shake hands with you and say, if you have antibodies against polio, you're okay. Yellow fever, you're okay. Hepatitis, you're okay. Measles, you're okay. Syphilis, you're okay. That's the best we can have, with one exception only. If you have antibodies against diabetes, everybody says, oh my God, 10 years from now you'll have diarrhea, start taking AZT and DDI today. That's the best we can do right now. That's paradox number 3. There's another paradox that I already alluded at, Why, according to the Durban Declaration again and before, would it take a virus 10 years from infection to cause a disease? All viruses that we know cause diseases within days, weeks, at the very most months after infection. In fact, the Italians had figured that out long before anybody else. And that's why they locked up people suspect of carriers of microbial diseases, viruses and microbes, for 40 days. The word was coined for that reason, quarantine, which means 40 giorni. For 40 giorni they were locked up, and when they didn't show diseases, arriving in harbors in Venice or in Naples or in Genoa hundreds of years ago, then they were turned loose. They could now have cappuccino and pasta. And until then they were locked up and they waited out what would happen with the disease. There is no exception to this rule, and now we can explain exactly why that is so. Because viruses infecting a cell, creating 1,000 new viruses within a day, and then again 1,000 a day later, it goes up exponentially with a multiplication rate of 10 to the 3. So within a week or two you have as many viruses, you have cells in your body, either you get sick or you won't ever get sick from it. There is no precedent anywhere inside for a virus causing a disease 10 years after infection. Nowhere. And certainly there's no explanation why HIV should be that way, because the one thing we have learned from mass producing it in cell culture, it replicates just as fast as all other viruses within 24 hours and produces 1,000 new viruses per cell. So at that rate, it should be able to cause a disease in a week or two, or it would never cause one. So the 10-year latent period stands a totally unsupported artifact for 10 years, unexplained by 5,000 scientists, including Nobel Prize winner in Nature, and by nobody else. There's also another paradox. How could a virus with just a minimum of genetic information like HIV, 9 kilobases, that means 9,000 nucleotides, cause 26 different diseases? As you may know, you have about 1 million kilobases. HIV contains 9, that's very small, very tiny bit of information. All other viruses that we know, bacteria, with that amount of information or even more, cause typically just one disease, and that's what they are named for. Hepatitis viruses cause liver disease, flu causes flu, herpes and measles and mumps and yellow fever and so on. HIV is the only one, and the one with the lowest IQ, the lowest intelligence quotient you can possibly find among viruses. 9,000 kilobases is extremely low. Is said to cause 26 different diseases. It's like saying, here is an instrument that sounds like an orchestra, when all other instruments are violin, a piano, or a trumpet, and they sound, let's say, a herpes virus, a syphilis virus, gonorrhea, or whatever they cause, and this one causes everything else in the world. That is an unresolved paradox as well. And a very serious one right at the end here. How that is something that used to be noted at the beginning of the epidemic and is now covered up completely because we don't talk diseases anymore. We just call everything AIDS, whether it's diarrhea or dementia, Kaposi sarcoma or pneumonia, it's simply all called AIDS. The CDC has omitted all references for diseases in its records, and so does the World Health Organization now. Although it's called Centers for Disease Control, they call it all AIDS. So, but the virus does not cause the same epidemics let me see, that slipped out now, here it is. It causes different diseases, quite different diseases in different risk groups. For example, in the US, Kaposi sarcoma is almost only diagnosed, and in Europe, in male homosexuals. Hemophiliacs, blood transfusion recipients, and even intravenous drug users and junkies do not ever seem to get Kaposi sarcoma. Or tuberculosis is rarely diagnosed. It occasionally happens in male homosexuals, but it's typically found in intravenous drug users. And when you look in Africans, they're never diagnosed pneumocystis, pneumonia or dementia. It's always tuberculosis and fevers and infections. And in children, actually, there's no Kaposi ever, not even PCP. They have bacterial pneumonias in the same United States. So the same virus is causing clinically different epidemics or risk group specific epidemics and diseases in different risk groups. There is no precedent for that in microbiology anywhere. There's no bacterium or no virus that causes different diseases in different risk groups in the same country. That is Kaposi sarcoma in homosexuals in New York, and tuberculosis in intravenous drug users, and bacterial pneumonia in children. There's no precedent for that. So the AIDS establishment or the AIDS researchers have been unable to answer any of these basic paradoxa of the virus hypothesis. They have not produced a vaccine and not produced a drug. But the virus hypothesis has not only been unable to solve any of its original problems, it has now likely generated problems of its very own. And they're very serious problems indeed. There's growing concern among those who criticize the virus hypothesis, and now even by the US government and AIDS researchers, that the same drugs that have been developed as anti-AIDS or antiviral drugs are in fact causing AIDS and causing AIDS diseases. And this is not a big surprise. In fact, when AZT, the DNA chain terminator AZT, was first introduced in 1987, Science had an editorial warning about bone marrow toxicity. The bone marrow is where the T cells and the B cells and the immune system is made. And they knew then that the bone marrow was intoxicated because it's fast-growing cells that are terminated by DNA synthesis and causes, as a result, immune deficiency, which in essence is saying AZT is AIDS by prescription. What the virus was supposed to do, the drug has been doing. As a result, this was completely ignored or disregarded until last year. Now, except by so-called dissidents who were outsiders and therefore were not taken serious, because we are living in a scientific democracy now where only majorities count, when science has never been the realm of democracy. The majority is great for politics, but in science it has always been a disaster. All progress in science was made by total minorities, from Galileo to whatever it is, to Max Planck. These were always minorities, total minorities of one or very few against the majority. That's scientific progress. Majorities are good for politics, but not so great for science. So, as of last year, then, the U.S. government, or as they call it now, they say it's the U.S. government. When it's progress, then it's Fauci or Gallo. But when it's problems, then it's U.S. government researchers. They're all of a sudden very anonymous now, and the government is doing this. The government is doing all of a sudden a lot of science. And they have introduced what they call euphemistically drug holidays. That is to say, when the HIV positive people or AIDS patients on AZT and DDI are so bad off, they're throwing up, they're getting diarrhea, they're losing weight, and they're getting pneumonia, they give them weeks or months off the drugs to recover from the medication. And as soon as they have recovered sufficiently, back on the drugs, they go. They called that in Science News last year, drug holidays. So you leave New York, you go for a couple of weeks to Monaco or wherever it is, to the Côte d'Azur without drugs, have some Vino Rosso and some parties, and then as soon as you recover, back to New York and you get AZT and DDI and you're back in the hospital. But it's paid for, of course. We have $93 billion to spare. They interviewed in that article in Science News, which is part of the Science magazine, a professor from New York Hospital Cornell Medical Center, that's Kendall Smith. He's an Orthodox AIDS scientist. He actually was supposed to come to the meeting in South Africa. I think he didn't come. He says right now the disease is life-threatening on one hand, and the drugs that we have so far have life-threatening toxicities on the other hand. It puts us between a rock and a hard place, that poor doctor. So now early this year, the New York Times reported, the same New York Times that has hyped up antiviral drug medications for years, that the US, Altman wrote that, is now recalling the first of these drugs. Neviparin, you mentioned it, that was recalled in January. The US is warning doctors, it says, to limit drug use. It was not front page use. There were no proud scientists saying we are cautiously optimistic, we are curing them, we have a company coming, and you can buy the drugs from us. Now it was anonymous, and it was on page 16 somewhere in the back part of the New York Times. And now, just a month ago, there's an article, also not on the front page, that the US government science is now altering a long-held policy. Federal health officials are now recommending that treatment for the AIDS virus be delayed as long as possible for people without symptoms. In other words, we don't treat people with DNA chain terminators who are healthy any longer and just have antibodies. More recently, concern has grown, that's what it says in the New York Times, from Anthony Fauci's panel, over nerve damage, weakened bones, unusual accumulations of fat in the neck and the abdomen, diabetes, and a number of other serious side effects of therapy. And that's a euphemism. They don't say about bone marrow toxicity and lymphoma and cancers and Kaposi sarcoma that are induced by these chemotherapies. Many people have developed dangerously high levels of cholesterol and other lipids in the blood, raising concern that HIV-infected people might face yet another epidemic of heart disease as a result of treatment with drugs from the AIDS scientists. So Dr. Fauci, who is chairman of the panel, said in an interview, "We are adopting a significantly more conservative recommendation profile." It's very smooth language. Now, the man who has introduced one DNA chain terminator after another in the New York Times with fanfare and recommended it, and in fact forced people to take it, now is saying we are adopting a significantly more conservative recommendation profile. It's very smooth Fifth Avenue language here. So that is the history of AIDS research till now. It has not produced anything positive for the AIDS patient or the taxpayer. It costs 93 billion, and it is about to admit that 250,000 people in the US who get these DNA chain terminators in the name of this hypothesis are now suffering or dying from diseases caused by the treatment. That's not something to be particularly proud of. So the history of science has shown before that flawed hypotheses generate paradoxa and worthless results, to be fair about it. The virus hypothesis appears to be a big case in point. In view of this, in fact, science would have to recoup and say we have to re-evaluate this hypothesis based on the scientific method. According to the scientific method, it says in the Webster's Dictionary, a problem is identified, relevant data are gathered, the hypothesis is formulated, either this one or another one better, and the hypothesis is then empirically tested. And this is what we should want to do, and we should compare the infectious AIDS hypothesis or virus hypothesis to the major other possibility, namely chemical AIDS, that chemicals are the cause of the disease, like recreational drugs, medication, or malnutrition. The chemicals in the case of malnutrition being missing proteins and vitamins and minerals from your diet. That is what most of us, except for old age, are dying from in this world now, in the Western world. 99% of non-age related deaths are drug-induced. Smoking, drinking, cocaine, heroin, accidents. Infectious diseases claim less than 1% of not age-related deaths and morbidity and mortality in the Western world. They are obsolete. They are 19th century or very early 20th century, because owing to the better nutrition or best nutrition that we have, sanitation, the immune system of everybody is as good as it could genetically be, and microbes cannot do anything to somebody who has an intact immune system. Whether you live with or without condoms, or inside or outside condoms, you are rather safe against all microbes, because we have lived with them for roughly 3 billion years now on this planet, and done pretty well. We came from Adam and Eve to about 6 times 10 to the 9 people now, with conventional unprotected sex, without bathtubs and showers and soap and even antibiotics for a long, long time. Now it's changing. So now, suppose then AIDS were a viral epidemic. Let's give them the benefit of doubt. What would we predict if it were a viral epidemic, as Anthony Fauci and Robert Gallo and David Baltimore and Harold Varmus and Luc Montagnier and Robin Weiss and Nature, the 5,000 people plus the Nobel Prize winners have assured us virtually every day in the last 20 years. Well, the very first thing we would predict for a viral or microbial epidemic is it is contagious. You don't have to take even one class in biology, you know a microbial epidemic should be contagious. Well, is that the case with AIDS? In America, the most leading, most progressive, most everything country in the world, best stock market and most computers and most scientists per square mile, we had so far 750,000 AIDS patients in 18 years. All of these have been seen by doctors and healthcare workers and families and alike. There isn't even one report, not even one case report in the huge literature on AIDS ever describing a doctor, a nurse, a healthcare worker contracting AIDS from his or her patients. In 18 years, 750,000 people developing AIDS, half of them dying in these hospitals. They're getting injections, they're washed, whatever they are done, they brush their teeth and their surgery. Not in one single case do we have even a case report. Here's a heterosexual doctor who treated an AIDS patient with Kaposi sarcoma, and now he comes home with diarrhea or dementia because he contracted AIDS from a patient. Not one case in 18 years and 750 opportunities. That's pretty bad news for a virus surviving on contact infection from one person to another. Well, you may argue sex is the mechanism of transmission. Even that occurs. There are quite a few homosexual doctors and healthcare workers in San Francisco and somewhere else in the United States. And even those have never contracted AIDS from a patient. There are the American hemophiliacs, or the wives of hemophiliacs. There are 15,000 HIV positive hemophiliacs. For 18, 20 years now, we know them. Their wives, they don't say exactly how many are married, but let's say a third. That would be 5,000 wives of hemophiliacs, which are HIV positive. Not one has ever developed AIDS from her HIV positive husband. 3 million Americans per year receive blood transfusions. Before the AIDS test in 1985, they were all getting HIV randomly. Not all, or could have gotten it randomly. There's not one case ever of a Kaposi sarcoma in a blood transfusion recipient. Now we had 10 years latent period in between. There are pneumonias and yeast infections in transfusion recipients. But even the Centers for Disease Control acknowledge grudgingly when they compare the incidence of yeast infection and pneumonia in blood transfusion recipients with and without HIV, it is exactly the same. Because blood transfusion recipients are not people who have missed lunch or dinner and now get a blood transfusion. They're typically, in America, 7 to 80-year-old people with a bypass operation, a cancer surgery, or some other age-related or late disease, serious disease. It's not an 18-year-old kid, heterosexual, falling from a bicycle or a motorcycle and getting a blood transfusion. 98% of the blood transfusion recipients are old people, and they tend to get pneumonia and yeast infections when they're hospitalized and have other conditions that impair the immune system. No evidence like that. So there are also anecdotal cases that speak against a contagious AIDS epidemic or a contagious AIDS period. You possibly remember Arthur Ashe, the black tennis champion who died now 6-7 years ago from weight loss and pneumonia after being treated with AZT and DDI by his doctors in New York. Among them, in fact, our consultant was the Man of the Year of Time magazine, David Ho. He was HIV positive from a blood transfusion, they suspect, before he got married. He was married for 10 years. He's now survived by his wife and his 8-year-old daughter. In 10 years of marriage, he transmitted his DNA successfully to his wife and produced a baby. But HIV doesn't seem to hurt the wife or the baby. He died from AIDS, of course, on HCT, I would suspect. But if it's a sexually transmitted virus and you cannot transmit it in a marriage of 10 years that produces a baby, that looks bad for a sexually transmitted virus. You see, viruses have to make a living too. Syphilis or gonorrhea are transmitted by unprotected sex at an efficiency of at least 50%. That's how they can survive, because if you are, so they have to move to a new host from one to another. But if it takes 10 years of marriage and you can't transmit it, it looks bad for the microbe to make a living on sexual transmission. That Rock Hudson is another example. You may remember him. He was living with his last lover before he died in 85 for 2 years in the days before safe sex. Nobody talked about safe sex then, and Rock Hudson was not the type anyway. He was doing everything, as you can see from his biography, that was possible. He was drinking, he was smoking, he took poppers and nitrate inhalants, he took all the drugs available, but his lover, for some reason, didn't. He was a health freak, and he's alive today. He was just interviewed by Larry King a couple of months ago. He's healthy. 18 years later, from a sexually, when his date, his last lover, Rock Hudson, died 15 years ago from a so-called sexual transmitted disease. And there's Magic Johnson, you may have heard of him, who has possibly picked it up. He claims he had 5,000 unprotected sexual contacts before he got married, and that's why when they found out at marriage that he was positive, he took AZT for a couple of months, threw up and stopped taking it. Now 10 years later, again he has a kid, he's married, everybody's healthy. He doesn't take drugs any longer. So sexually transmitted virus it is, but disease not so much yet. So that's one prediction, that certainly the AIDS epidemic fails completely. There is no evidence in the wonderful United States with 200,000 papers on AIDS, not one case description of a doctor, healthcare worker, or hemophiliac, or wife of hemophiliac, or anecdotal case ever picking up the disease, and that's supposed to be a contagious disease. The other one, the next prediction is, let me jump to 3. Typically, infectious diseases go up in a short time. They rise and fall exponentially, as we say. And that has been first recognized in the early part of the last century by William Farr, a British epidemiologist. He says infectious diseases shoot up within, like a seasonal flu, a polio, a cholera, or a plague epidemic in the medieval and the late days, within months, and then he goes down. And this is even by an AIDS, world-known AIDS researcher. He's from the Roy Anderson. He is an AIDS epidemiologist, professor of zoology at the Wellcome Trust Center. That's the Burroughs Wellcome, the ACT company, paying scientists chairs for epidemiology, infectious disease in Oxford, United Kingdom. And here he's saying how typically an infectious disease epidemic spreads in a population. It forms what he calls a bell-shaped curve. This is a plague epidemic that killed 2/3 of the people in London in 1665. Was recorded at the time very carefully. It went up, as you can see, the ordinate are weeks. Within a couple of weeks, it was at a peak level. 2/3 of London was dead. Then the survivors were immune. The susceptible people were dead, and the microbe, in this case the bacillus, could no longer spread, and the epidemic disappeared. That happens with flu, happens with polio, happens with all other viruses. So does the great Professor Anderson confirm here, with one exception, of course, and that is AIDS. Maybe we could just flash back briefly how AIDS is spreading according to the World Health Organization, the CDC. That's a very different ordinate. Look, here we are covering 2 decades, and it's going up very slowly and coming down very slowly again, in most cases. If it were an infectious epidemic, it could go up, it should go up exponentially, very sharp, and then should limit itself. It's self-limiting. All infectious diseases are self-limiting, or else we wouldn't be here to talk about it, and the microbes wouldn't be here to chew us up. If they would kill everybody around, there would be no men and there would be no microbes. But they don't. The typical infectious diseases, they get what they can in a short time, then they initiate or induce immunity or vaccination, natural vaccination, and the survivors will be resistant. Now the microbe doesn't have a host anymore and disappears again, or disappears somewhere in a latent form, becomes a passenger that doesn't cause a disease because you are immune against it. Like when you're infected with polio today and you have a vaccine, you wouldn't even notice it. You might have diarrhea for a day, but no longer. And this is not the time course of a typical infectious disease, and I'm not quoting Peter Duesberg, I'm quoting now Roy Anderson, the welcome professor of the Department of Infectious Diseases at Oxford, United Kingdom. So AIDS does not meet the second prediction of an infectious epidemic, namely it doesn't increase exponentially and doesn't decrease, and is not self-limiting, which is the hallmark of all infectious diseases. The third one that we can expect and predict for an infectious disease, it is random. The microbes, viruses, they cannot distinguish between men and women, and they can certainly not distinguish, there was the previous one, between homosexual, that's one, yeah, between homosexuals and heterosexuals. In fact, even the Durban Declaration says in Nature that HIV doesn't recognize social and geographic barriers. And they're completely right about this. Everything we know about microbes is that they don't. And yet, look at AIDS. In America and Europe, for 18 years now, AIDS has been 85% male and 50% female. And that's as far apart from 50-50, that would be random distribution between the sexes, as day and night. There's not one infectious epidemic anywhere on this planet that we ever heard about that isn't roughly 50-50% distributed. Of course, if you look at small areas, if you go to a nunnery and look for flu, you find it's 99% female, maybe father confessor is male and has it too. So it's 1% male, 99% female. Or if you go to the Castro district in San Francisco and look for syphilis, you'll find it's 99% male because all the homosexuals live in the Castro district. But if you look at 250 million Americans and 400 million Europeans, you'll find that syphilis and flu are 50-50 distributed between men and women. But when you look at 250 million Americans and 400 million Europeans for 20 years for AIDS, you'll find it's 85% male and 15% female. And virtually all of those females are intravenous drug users. The males, a third of them are intravenous drug users, and 2/3 are male homosexuals, and not your all male homosexuals from next door, but those who said they had thousands of sex partners, and that's not possible with testosterone alone. That's done with amphetamines, with cocaine, with nitrite inhalants and tons of recreational drugs that they are using, and they're advertising, they admit that they're using them for this very purpose as aphrodisiacs and sex drugs. So AIDS does not meet the criterion of an infectious epidemic, or based on the germ theory, that it's randomly distributed in the population. It's highly non-randomly distributed, 85% male, and among males, 2/3 of them are homosexual. No precedent for that ever in microbial diseases. And then I want to list the last point, which I already alluded at. All infectious diseases are recognized by a certain phenotype that they have. If there were a flu epidemic, you have essentially a pneumonia, a lung disease, and if there is a plague epidemic, so then you have all these infections on the skin and in the whole body, and if there is a polio epidemic, you have paralysis. But if there's an AIDS epidemic, you have different diseases in different people, as I already mentioned. The Kaposi sarcoma affects homosexuals primarily, tuberculosis is in junkies, bacterial pneumonias in babies, and pneumonias and yeast infections exclusively in hemophiliacs. So this virus would cause different epidemics and different diseases in different risk groups. There's no precedent for that among infectious diseases. So what do we do at that point? Apparently the whole thing doesn't make much sense. We would have to call for the scientific method, namely to look at a different hypothesis and see how well that could be. Maybe here's a hint from an old scientist friend of mine. This would be Sherlock Holmes. The circumstantial evidence is, they say all AIDS people are antibody positive, have the virus. Well, first of all, that's an artifact of the definition, because they don't call anybody an AIDS patient if there's no virus. And second, to have a virus or antibody against the virus isn't proof that this virus is the cause of disease. So Sherlock Holmes would advise you to take a different point of view, and this is what has been done already in AIDS science, but most people have actually forgotten it. Even the AIDS researchers and the 5,000 who signed the Durban Declaration didn't seem to remember that the original theory of what's causing AIDS was called the lifestyle hypothesis. And it was not forgotten because it was published in obscure journals. It was published in the New England Journal of Medicine in 1981 that nitrite inhalants, poppers, cocaine and heroin are causes of AIDS in American male homosexuals and intravenous drug users. It was published by current leading AIDS researchers, virus AIDS researchers. They published in 1981 and 82 in The Lancet, in Nature, in the New England Journal, like Goethe, like Plattner, an epidemiologist. Goethe is a NIH man, Haberkos and Doherty, Milbrand, Friedman, Keene, he's a professor in New York now, McManus, and even the director of the CDC, Jim Kern, and Harold Jaffe. They had a huge study showing that drug use correlated directly with AIDS in male homosexuals. They analyzed thousands of them and reported it in the Annals of Internal Medicine. So all of these are very noticeable journals, and the scientists are the same guys that are now pushing the virus hypothesis. So it's not obscure scientists publishing in obscure journals like now the dissidents do. They're coming to the Secondo Rinascimento University and publish in some in Genetica or some journals you never heard of. No, these guys published in the New England Journal of Medicine, and I called Anthony. In fact, even the African AIDS epidemic was said to be a chemical epidemic. In this case, it was malnutrition. One of the authors was Anthony Fauci. He said the commonest cause of T-cell immunodeficiency worldwide is protein malnutrition. Also signed by Maurice Seligman. who was head of the Concord trial, the French-English trial testing the toxicity of ACT. He was one of them. He said, malnutrition is a leading cause, particularly in Africa. The wide distribution of parasitic infection and non-immunosuppressive activity of these infections lead to opportunistic infections and make it difficult to identify patients with AIDS on the basis of the current epidemiological criteria from industrialized nations. We have to look at immunodeficiency due to protein calorie malnutrition. That's what these HIV researchers said in 1984, again in the New England Journal of Medicine. Well, as you know, since then the drug or chemical AIDS hypothesis had to go underground when in 1984 HIV was endorsed as the cause of AIDS by the US government. And you cannot, on this planet, unpunishedly oppose the US government, except perhaps some black presidents in South Africa can afford it for a year or two, but I don't dare to predict what's going to happen to him. But everybody else on this planet has to follow orders from Washington, or else they will be defunded and discredited and will soon be nowhere. Might be forced to take ACT. Who knows what's going to happen next to us? But but the drug hypothesis has survived, at least in the underground, and it has recently been resurrected and expanded to include the antiviral drugs, the treatments. First by guys like you can meet here at the meeting, like Rasnik and Duesberg and Al-Bayadi and Anthony, this guy Brink from South Africa. They have proposed that anti-HIV therapy, DNA chain terminals, must be causes of AIDS and AIDS-defining diseases. And now, most recently, we have been joined again by the leading AIDS researchers, namely Anthony Fauci, who has said he has adopted a different recommendation profile, namely that ACT is not so good anymore, particularly if you are not sick yet. Don't take it. And if you are sick, you grant it now drug holidays if you are dying from the medications that he's prescribing. So it looks like we are getting in better and better company. I'm sure maybe at the next meeting here there will be Anthony Fauci and Montagnier warning us to take antiviral drugs. As long as we we should just wear condoms to be safe for the rest of our life. Maybe live in full body condoms with a little snorkel up here, so get some oxygen with a snorkel, and the rest we can just eat from an autoclave. Yeah. So now, what does the chemical AIDS hypothesis do? If we could just go quickly back, and then I'm done, to the one where I showed what the drug hypothesis could. It can actually see the chemical AIDS hypothesis can resolve all of the paradoxa that the infectious hypothesis has raised. Why is AIDS not contagious? Well, a drug disease is not contagious. If you take cyanide and your date or mate or your girlfriend or boyfriend doesn't, you're going to die and he or she is going to survive. Or if you smoke cigarettes and he or she doesn't, no matter how many sexual contacts you might have, he or she will get lung cancer and you are very unlikely to get it. You could, there's a low background of lung cancer without smoking. So why is AIDS restricted to risk groups? Well, drug diseases happen to be restricted to risk groups. If you don't take the drugs, you won't get sick from the drugs. If you don't starve, you will not lose weight and you won't get the corresponding diseases of malnutrition, which is immunodeficiency and pneumonias and yeast infection and all these the diseases that you see in Africa, and in fact you see in America in junkies. They're poor because they have to spend their money on drugs and there's nothing left for gourmet food, and they don't sleep because they're high on drugs, and 5 or 10 years later they come with tuberculosis and yeast infections and diarrhea to hospital to be diagnosed with HIV antibodies by Anthony Fauci and treated with ACT until they're dead very soon after. So that's explainable entirely by the drug hypothesis. The drug hypothesis also explains why AIDS wouldn't be self-limiting. In fact, the Durban Declaration says there's no end in sight for the epidemic, and they're totally right about this. There is no immunity against lung cancer from smoking. There's no immunity against alcohol, no matter how often you drink it. And you may become a little less easily intoxicated, but you won't get immune against the negative effects of alcohol, and likewise you won't get immune against cocaine. It will take you more and more to get high, but the negative effects of it, you won't get antibodies that say from now on you can take cane as much as you want because you have antibodies against it. There's one thing that might be take a little more. Why does it take so long to get these diseases? And that is also, there's also precedent for that. That is completely explained here by the nature of diseases caused by recreational drugs and even medical drugs. When you take, like here, look at this. This is what Cairns has published in his book, Cancer Science and Society, and now in his recent one again. He is recording the lung cancer epidemics in England as smoking became a pastime over the years. Yeah, we could take either one of them, but you could see it's not a bell-shaped curve that rises exponentially and goes down, but it's something that increases over years as smoking became popular, exactly as recreational drug use became popular in the 80s, and now in the politically correct 90s, drug use, at least in the US and even in Europe, is declining again, and so is AIDS. Slowly, over decades, it goes up, and slowly it goes down or stabilizes depending on where. And this is exactly why it takes years. You won't get lung cancer in a month or in 2 months. You get it even if you smoke very heavily, only in 10 or 20 years. And you won't get dementia and weight loss and tuberculosis from cocaine from 50 parties. But if you go on for 10 years and do it 3 or 4 or 5 times a week, then you will end up in the hospital sooner or later. So that explains the long latent period, and it also explains the risk group specific diseases. Best example is Kaposi sarcoma in male homosexuals. In fact, a third of it in the US is diagnosed as pulmonary lung cancer, essentially Kaposi sarcoma, because male homosexuals are almost the only one who consistently use the nitrite inhalants as a gay drug, as they say. It relaxes smooth muscles. It was invented 100 years ago in England against angina, relaxing the muscles. It gives you a high in the brain, which is cheap, and it facilitates anal sex because it relaxes the smooth muscle of the anus as well, and therefore it has become as they call it in their own gay literature, often the gay drug. And it is a mutagen, and it is a known carcinogen. And so that explains why that is restricted, or mainly restricted, to male homosexuals, why intravenous drug users and babies and hemophiliacs don't get it. And the tuberculosis is the malnutrition and of the intravenous drug users, who are typically poor. It costs them $100 a day to get the drugs, and there's nothing left to eat and hardly a place to pay rent anymore and to sleep, so they get these diseases of poverty. So in conclusion then, the chemical AIDS hypothesis can resolve all paradoxa of viral AIDS, and it proposes easy gains against AIDS. We could ban all antiviral drugs, and we would save 200,000 people who are dying now on antiviral drugs. Even though they take drug holidays, they're inevitably dying on DNA chain terminators and protease inhibitors. It's impossible to live on this planet forever and take DNA chain terminators every day, which is the standard of care, or has been until very recently, for HIV positive people. But instead of, the only problem that we have is the AIDS orthodoxy, with its unlimited funding and if its complete control over the media and the funding process. It is little known in America, and certainly little known in the rest of the world, that they have almost complete power to exclude all alternative hypotheses, which is the basis of the scientific method. prevailing or any hypothesis fails, you look for another. But they can prevent that in a very subtle way, certainly in America. In America, all grants, all research monies are paid for, virtually all in medical sciences, by the National Institute of Health. And the National Institute of Health delegates its authority to grant these monies to groups of experts, which are called peers. The peer review process is used. And the experts that judge the merits on an application on AIDS are those who have made major contributions to AIDS research. I was one of them when I was popular in cancer research. Before I criticized AIDS, I was an expert. I was invited to study section and asked by the NIH to help distributing the $10 billion they have on cancer research per year. Is this a good grant? So when you are in that position, you can fly somebody to the moon if they say there's a new HIV strain which explains why it takes 10 years from infection to AIDS. That is possible. It would cost $1 billion. We have 10, so you can fly one guy up to the moon to come up this spec with that virus strain, have a new nature declaration why it takes 10 years. There's only one thing these guys cannot afford, and that is give $75,000 to somebody who has a different hypothesis, like chemical AIDS. Because then their laboratories would have to be closed or redirected, which is very difficult. Their investments, the academic investments, that hundreds of papers that the leading researchers have published would be called into questions. Their companies may have to be closed down. They would no longer produce AZT and DDI. Their testing patents would have to be recalled. Gallo, Fauci, Montagnier are millionaires from daily. In America, we have 20 million HIV tests for $50 a year, on which Weiss, Gallo, Montagnier take a huge share. For them to say, let's Duesberg or Rasnik have a look at another explanation, would be company suicide, academic suicide, and in fact, last not least, some of them may have to stand trial for people who have died on ACT, who said, my lover, my son, my kid was poisoned to death, I want you to pay for this. So in view of this, it is necessary to find a way, if it's at all possible, to liberate medical science from particular AIDS science, from the control of experts or the so-called peer review, and return it to the scientific method. That's my call for action. Thank you. Oh, you still have the Brusov, David? I mean, the Brusov thing? Or did you? Oh, I didn't give it to you? I gave it to
Allora,
you.
Peter Duesberg ha ripreso i termini. Quindi mi pare